Urgent signs you can't ignore. The universe is sending them to you. Something brought you here. Not an algorithm. Not a random scroll through an endless feed. Something older than that. Something that does not operate on timelines or recommendations. You were pulled here. And the part of you that already knows this is the same part that has been trying to get your attention for a long time. You have been feeling it, haven't you? That low, persistent hum beneath the surface of your days, the sense that something is shifting, or needs to. But you cannot name it, cannot locate it, cannot fix it. Your mind reaches for control the way a drowning hand reaches for anything solid. And the tighter you grip, the more exhausted you become. This is not a video about positive thinking. It is not going to ask you to visualize harder, vibrate higher, or pretend the weight you are carrying does not exist. What it is going to do is far more confronting and far more liberating than any of that. It is going to show you 5 signs, 5 specific, undeniable signs that the universe has been placing directly in the path of your life. Signs you may have noticed and dismissed. Signs that felt like coincidence, like loss, like silence, like the wrong timing. Signs that your rational mind filed away under irrelevant because it did not have the framework to understand what they were actually saying. By the time this video ends, it will. But before we reach the signs themselves, we need to look honestly at the state you are in right now. Not to judge it, not to fix it, but to understand what it is truly telling you. Because the condition you arrive in today is not separate from the message. It is part of it. There is a version of you that wakes up at 3 in the morning with a mind already running, already calculating, already rehearsing conversations that have not happened, preparing for losses that have not come. That version of you is not broken. That version of you is signaling, loudly, persistently, with everything it has. And the universe, in its patient, precise, and deeply personal way, has been answering that signal. Not with the silence you interpreted as abandonment, not with the chaos you read as punishment, with signs, with redirections, with the kind of interventions that only reveal their meaning when you are finally ready to look at them without fear. That readiness is what brought you here. You did not find this video. This video found you. And that, before we say another word, is already the first thing worth paying attention to. The 3 a.m. soul, why you're here and why it's not an accident. There is a specific kind of awake that has nothing to do with rest. It arrives in the dark hours, when the noise of the world has gone quiet and there is nothing left between you and the truth of what you are feeling. 3 in the morning is not just a time. For certain souls, it is a condition. A recurring threshold where the carefully constructed architecture of the day collapses, and what remains is raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. If you know that threshold, you know exactly what lives there. The thoughts that circle without landing. The questions that have no clean answers. The ache that is not quite grief, not quite fear, but carries the weight of both. Most people treat that signal like a malfunction. They medicate it, distract it, scroll through their phones until exhaustion overrides awareness. But what if it is not a malfunction? What if it is a transmission? Marcus Aurelius did not write his meditations for publication. He wrote them in the private hours, in the space between duty and sleep, as a man genuinely wrestling with what it means to live with integrity inside a world that cannot be controlled. He was, in every meaningful sense, a 3 in the morning soul, and what he found in that darkness was not despair. It was clarity. That same clarity is available to you, not because suffering is noble, it is not, but because the soul that is genuinely restless is a soul that has not yet surrendered its awareness to comfort. You are here because something in you refused to go numb. That refusal is not weakness wearing the mask of anxiety. It is aliveness insisting on itself. The universe does not send its most important communications to those who are settled and satisfied. It reserves its most urgent signals for the ones who are awake in both senses of the word. Awake at 3 in the morning, and awake enough to know that the discomfort they are carrying means something. Now consider this seriously. Of all the content available to you at this moment, something navigated you to this specific message. Carl Jung dedicated years of his work to understanding what he called synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence, the non-random alignment of outer events with inner states. Jung did not arrive at this concept lightly. He arrived at it because the evidence, accumulated across thousands of hours of clinical observation, refused to be explained away. The right things reach the right people at the right moment with a frequency that defies pure probability. You are inside one of those moments right now. The pain you have been carrying did not delay your awakening. It preceded it. The way winter does not delay spring, but makes it possible. There is a contract being established in this moment between this message and your soul. It asks only one thing: your willingness to consider that everything you have lived through, including the parts that still make no sense, has been in service of something larger than the story your fear has been telling you about it. You are not here because your life went wrong. You are here because it is going somewhere your limited perspective cannot yet see, and the universe is trying to show you where. The invisible prison. How the need to control became your cage. No one chooses to build a prison around themselves. The walls go up quietly, one reasonable decision at a time, one understandable defense at a time, until the structure is so familiar that it no longer feels like confinement. It feels like safety. It feels like responsibility. It feels like the only sensible way to move through a world that has already proven, on more than one occasion, that it cannot be trusted to hold you gently. The need to control is not a personality defect. It is evidence of a soul that learned, at some point in its history, that unpredictability meant pain. And so the mind, brilliant, adaptive, relentlessly protective, developed a system. A way of anticipating, managing, preparing, and preempting. A way of making sure that nothing arrived without warning. But there is a cost to that kind of vigilance. The body carries it as tension that never fully releases. The mind carries it as a background hum of what-ifs that never quiets. The soul carries it as a heaviness that sits persistently in the center of the chest. The weight of a person who has appointed themselves the sole guardian of every outcome that matters to them. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and spent his formative years in absolute external powerlessness, arrived at one of the most liberating insights in human thought. He observed that everything falls into one of two categories: what is within our power and what is not. Our judgments, our intentions, our chosen responses, these are within our power. Everything else is not. And the entirety of human suffering flows from the consistent error of treating things outside our control as though they were inside it. Think about the last time you lay awake rehearsing a conversation you needed to have. Think about the energy spent constructing scenarios for how something might go wrong. Think about the times you held back from something true and alive in you because you could not guarantee how it would be received. All of that is the tax levied by the need to control. And it is a tax that pays for nothing, because the thing it was designed to protect you from, uncertainty, is not a condition that can be resolved. It is the nature of being alive. The ancient Hermetic principle of cause and effect states that nothing happens by chance, that every effect has its cause, operating across planes of existence that the conscious mind can only partially perceive. If everything is connected in a vast, intelligent chain of causation, then the universe is not random. It is not indifferent to your life. The forces moving beneath the surface of your circumstances are purposeful, even when they are painful. The cage of control was built on the assumption that the universe could not be trusted. But what if that assumption was the most expensive mistake your soul ever made? You cannot receive what you are too tense to hold. A hand clenched in a fist cannot be given anything. The soul locked in the perpetual management of outcomes has no available space for the unexpected gift, the unplanned arrival, the sign that comes from a direction the strategy never anticipated. This is where the journey changes. Not in the grand gesture, but in this quiet recognition. The prison was built by love, the love of a frightened self trying to protect what mattered. And it can be left, not with force, but with understanding. The question is no longer why am I suffering? The question that belongs to the person now beginning to wake up is different. It is this: what has my suffering been protecting me from seeing? The first sign is about to answer that. Sign 1, the repeat that won't let you rest. It started small enough that you almost didn't notice. A number appearing on a clock at a moment of particular weight. A song beginning to play at the exact instant a thought completed itself in your mind. A word, a specific, unusual word, surfacing in a conversation, then in something you read, then from the mouth of a stranger before the day was over. You noticed. You may have smiled at the coincidence and then moved on, because that is what the rational mind does with data it has no category for. It files it under meaningless and returns to what it believes it can manage. But the repeat did not stop. It never does. Because it was never trying to be explained. It was trying to be received. Carl Jung spent decades building the framework for what he named synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence of outer events and inner states, connected not by causality, but by meaning. Jung was a rigorous scientist of the psyche, and his arrival at this concept was not the result of wishful thinking. It was the result of confronting over and over again a phenomenon the existing models of psychology could not account for. The pattern beneath the apparent randomness insisting on being seen. What Jung identified scientifically, ancient traditions had already encoded spiritually. The Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above so below, as within so without, teaches that the universe operates through mirroring. When something repeats in your outer experience with unusual insistence, the universe is corresponding, reflecting back to you with increasing urgency, something your inner world is ready to recognize but has not yet consciously claimed. The human mind is, at its core, a pattern recognition instrument. The universe knows this about you. And so when it needs to reach you through the static of your daily preoccupations, it uses the one language your mind was built to receive: repetition, pattern. The signal that appears once and could be dismissed, appears again and demands attention, appears a third time and becomes impossible to honestly call accidental. The repeat is the universe tapping on the glass of your perception, not breaking it, not forcing entry, tapping, with the patient, precise insistence of something that knows you will hear it when you are ready. Now here is where this becomes personal. The specific repeat in your life is not generic. The universe does not send mass communications. What reaches you is calibrated to you, to your history, your language, your interior world, your unresolved questions. The sequence of numbers that stops you mid-breath carries a different message for your soul than it would carry for anyone else's, because it is arriving in the context of your specific inner landscape. This is why the repeat most often comes in moments of stillness, of transition, of emotional rawness, not because you are imagining things when you are vulnerable, but because vulnerability is the state in which the walls of the controlling mind are thinnest, and the signal finally has a clear enough path to reach the part of you that was always listening. The question the first sign is asking is not what does this mean in some cosmic codebook. It is asking something far more intimate. What were you thinking about, feeling, carrying, or questioning in the moment this appeared? Because the repeat is never just a symbol. It is a mirror. And what it is reflecting is the exact interior state your soul most needs you to look at honestly. You have been given this sign already. More than once. The fact that you are here suggests that some part of you knows it. The part of you that is done pretending the taps on the glass are the wind. Not every sign arrives as a gentle tap. Some arrive as something far more difficult. Something that, when it happened, did not feel like a sign at all. It felt like destruction. It felt like the universe had not sent a message but had simply taken something away. That sign is next. Sign 2. The loss that was actually a door. There are things that break you open in ways that no amount of preparation could have softened. A relationship that ended when you still had so much left to give. A career that dissolved before you were ready to let it go. A version of the future you had built in such precise and loving detail that when it disappeared, it took a part of your identity with it. A person. A place. A certainty you had organized your entire sense of safety around. And then, without sufficient warning or satisfying explanation, it was gone. If you are carrying one of those losses right now, what is about to be said is not going to be easy to receive. It asks something genuinely difficult of you. It asks you to consider seriously that the thing you lost was not taken from you by a careless or indifferent universe. It was removed by an intelligent one. That distinction is not small. It is the difference between a life lived in grief and a life lived in meaning. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and that the losses we resist accepting are invariably the ones that hold us longest in their grip. He was not counseling detachment from what matters. He was counseling something far more sophisticated, the capacity to love fully and simultaneously hold lightly, to be present for what is here without constructing your entire architecture of meaning around its permanence. Because nothing is permanent. And the soul that has built its sense of security on the continued presence of any specific external form has placed the foundations of its peace outside itself, where they were always going to be vulnerable. But here is what the universe consistently demonstrates with a precision that only becomes visible in retrospect. The loss that feels like destruction is almost always the precondition for an arrival that the previous structure would have made impossible to receive. A tree that survives every storm without bending grows rigid. It is the flexibility, learned through pressure, through loss, through branches that crack and regenerate, that allows it to survive the storms that would splinter something inflexible. You were not broken by your loss. You were pruned, and pruning does not feel like care when it is happening. It feels like violence, and it is in fact the very thing that makes the next growth possible at all. The Hermetic principle of polarity teaches that everything exists in pairs of opposites, and that what appears to be at one end of a spectrum is, in truth, the same thing as what appears at the other end, differing only in degree. Loss and arrival, ending and beginning, destruction and foundation. These are not separate phenomena. They are the same movement, perceived from different points on the timeline. Think honestly about a loss in your past, one that has had enough time to reveal some of its aftermath. Ask yourself, what arrived in the space that loss created? What became possible? What relationship formed? What version of you emerged that could not have emerged if the thing you lost had stayed? Most people, when they sit with this question in genuine honesty, find the same uncomfortable truth. They are glad, not for the pain, but for where the pain delivered them. The second sign is the universe's most serious communication. It arrives when the current structure of your life has become genuinely insufficient for the soul living inside it. The universe does not dismantle what still serves you. It removes what has become, however invisibly, a ceiling dressed as a floor. You survived something. You are still here. And the version of you that is still here is not the same version that existed before the loss. It is more honest, more stripped of pretense, more acquainted with what actually matters. Not a diminished version of who you were before. A more essential one. Sign 3. The stranger who said the exact right thing. You were not expecting it. You were somewhere ordinary. A waiting room, a bus, a conversation that began as small talk and then, without announcement or permission, became something else entirely. And a person you had never met, or barely knew or would never see again, said something that stopped the internal noise completely. It may have been a single sentence. It may have been a question they asked without knowing why they were asking it. You felt it before you understood it. Something in your body registered the arrival before your mind had finished processing the words. And then, almost immediately, the rational mind moved in to manage the experience, to reduce it to coincidence, to remind you that this person could not have known what you needed. The mind filed the moment under lucky accident and moved on. But you did not entirely move on, because you are here. And part of the reason you are here is that something in you kept the receipt. In the Gospel of Thomas, one of the Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi, there is a teaching that the transmission is not delivered through the expected channels or authorized voices. It arrives through whoever is available and open at the moment the receiving soul is ready. The vessel is not the point. The content is. This is the mechanism behind the stranger who said the exact right thing. The universe does not have a limited roster of designated messengers. It uses whoever is present, whoever is sufficiently open in that moment, to become temporarily transparent to a truth that needs to reach you. The stranger did not know they were carrying a message. They were simply being themselves. And in that unself-conscious naturalness, they became a channel. The message moved through them the way light moves through glass. The glass does not know it is carrying light. It simply does not obstruct it. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious provides a framework for understanding how one person can carry, without conscious knowledge, exactly what another person's soul requires. At the level of the collective unconscious, there is no meaningful separation between your inner need and the outer world's capacity to respond to it. The two are in constant, dynamic correspondence, and sometimes that correspondence becomes visible in the most disarmingly human form. A stranger, in an ordinary place, saying the thing you needed more than you knew. What makes this sign particularly powerful, and particularly easy to dismiss, is its apparent casualness. The universe wraps the transmission in the most ordinary packaging available. A person, a moment, a conversation that began as nothing. The soul waiting for its signs to arrive with trumpets will walk past this one every time. The soul that has learned to pay attention to what lands differently, what carries unexpected weight, what leaves a mark that persists long after the moment has passed, will recognize it immediately. Think back, not to the dramatic moments, to the quiet ones, the conversation that shifted something without announcing it. The person who appeared at the edge of a difficult period and said the one thing that kept you from a decision you would have regretted. That was not random. That was the universe, working through the most available instrument it had in that moment, sending you something it needed you to receive. Every time you allowed one of those moments to land, you were developing a perceptual muscle, the ability to be reached, the willingness to let something from outside the walls of your existing understanding carry genuine weight. That muscle is what you need for what comes next, because the fourth sign does not arrive through another person. It arrives through you. Sign 4. The knowing you keep talking yourself out of. It has been there longer than you are comfortable admitting. Not as a thought. Thoughts can be examined, argued with, and eventually dismissed. This is something that exists beneath thought. It lives in the place where certainty arrives before evidence does, where the body responds to truth before the intellect has finished its analysis. You have felt it as a pull in a specific direction you could not logically justify, as a resistance to a path that looked, by every external measure, like the sensible choice, as a persistent signal that no amount of reasoning has successfully silenced, only temporarily buried under enough noise to make it seem, for a while, like it was gone. It was not gone. It never is. Because it is not a preference or a passing emotional state. It is something older than that. The traditions that have explored this faculty most deeply have given it many names: intuition, the inner teacher, the voice of the higher self. But across all those frameworks, the description is consistent. It is the part of you that already knows, not the part that figures things out, the part that simply knows, without needing to figure. Epictetus draws a distinction that cuts directly to the heart of this sign. The knowing, this deep, persistent signal your soul has been sending, belongs entirely to the category of what is within your control. It is an interior orientation, a direction the soul has already chosen. And the only question is whether the conscious mind is willing to stop overriding it. The mechanism by which we override it is almost always the same. The question, but what if I'm wrong? It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like appropriate caution. But look more carefully at what that question is actually doing. It is not seeking information. It is a door placed in front of the knowing that requires the knowing to prove itself by the standards of the very rational mind it exists beneath. It is asking the soul to justify itself in a language the soul does not speak, and then using the soul's silence in that language as evidence that the knowing was never trustworthy. This is the trap. And the most brilliant people fall into it most reliably, because the more sophisticated the mind, the more sophisticated the arguments it can construct against the thing it fears. And what it fears, underneath all the language about practicality and risk, is the loss of control that comes with trusting something that cannot be fully explained. The Hermetic principle of mentalism, the teaching that consciousness is the substance from which all experience is made, carries a profound implication for inner knowing. If consciousness is primary, then the intelligence that speaks from the deepest layer of your awareness is not a subjective fantasy. It is closer to the source of reality than the surface logic that is trying to verify it. Beneath the conditioned mind, the mind shaped by accumulated fear and social programming, is something that retains access to a signal that the conditioned mind cannot receive. You know what the knowing is pointing toward. There is a direction it has been indicating, a relationship truth, a creative calling, a life structure that does not match the one currently in place, a conversation that needs to happen. You have told yourself the reasons it is not the right time. You have waited for a version of certainty that was never going to arrive, because certainty of the external kind is not how the universe delivers its invitations. It delivers them precisely at the edge of what you can guarantee. Because the step that requires no courage teaches nothing about what you are capable of. The knowing does not demand recklessness. What it is asking, what it has always been asking with a patience that should communicate something about its nature, is to be included in the conversation, to be given a seat at the table where your life's decisions are actually made. Here is the honest question this sign places before you. If you already knew the knowing was trustworthy, if you had absolute confirmation that what you have been sensing is real and worthy of being acted upon, what would you do differently, beginning tomorrow? The answer that arrived in you just now before the mind had time to qualify it is the fifth sign, and it is the one that changes everything that follows. Sign 5. The vision that keeps returning. It comes in the unguarded moments, in the space between sleeping and waking, when the filtering mechanisms of the conscious mind have not yet fully assembled themselves for the day. In the middle of a task so routine that attention drifts and something older and more insistent takes the space that habit vacated. It is not quite a plan. It is not quite a fantasy. It exists in a register between imagination and memory, a scene, a feeling, a version of your life that carries an inexplicable sense of recognition, as though you are not inventing it but remembering it, as though it belongs to you in a way that the life currently in front of you does not quite fully do. This is the fifth sign, and it is the most intimate of all of them, because it does not arrive from outside you. It arises from the deepest interior, from the place where soul and imagination share their borders, where the possible and the destined become, briefly, indistinguishable. William Blake wrote that the imagination is not a state. It is the human existence itself. For Blake, the imagination was not separate from reality. It was the faculty through which reality was first perceived, then shaped, then made. What you can see clearly in the interior is not a departure from what is real. It is the blueprint of what is becoming real. The vision that keeps returning is not wishful thinking dressed in persistent clothing. Wishful thinking is characterized by vagueness and passivity, a desire for comfort without direction, for arrival without movement. What you carry has specificity. It has texture. It knows things that a mere fantasy would have no reason to know. The quality of light in that imagined space, the particular feeling of that work in your hands, the precise sense of alignment that comes with living inside a life that actually matches who you are. That specificity is not the product of an overactive imagination. It is the product of a soul communicating in the only language available to it when the rational channels are closed. Image, feeling, recurring vision. The Sufi tradition, in the teachings flowing from Ibn Arabi's concept of the imaginal world, holds that between the material world and the world of pure spirit, there exists a third realm, the realm of image and vision. This realm is ontologically real. The images that arise within it carry genuine information. The vision that keeps returning is not produced by your imagination, the way a story is produced by an author. It is received by your imagination, the way a radio receiver captures a signal that was already there, already transmitting, waiting only for the instrument to be tuned to the right frequency. Think about how long you have carried this particular vision. Not the details. The details may shift as you grow. But the core of it, the essential feeling at the center, the quality of aliveness it carries. How long has that been with you? How many times have you almost moved toward it and then retreated? How many rational arguments have you assembled against it? And how many of those arguments, in the quiet hours when the defenses are down, have you privately known were less about wisdom and more about fear? The vision keeps returning because it is not finished with you. Because you are not finished with it. There is something in the relationship between who you are and what that vision represents that has not yet been resolved by anything other than arrival. There will not be a better moment. There will only be this one, and then the next one, each carrying the same invitation the vision has always carried. The universe does not withdraw the vision when you postpone responding to it. It simply continues sending it, with the patience of something that exists outside the timeline you are anxious about, waiting for the moment when you are finally more tired of carrying the distance between where you are and where you know you belong than you are afraid of what the crossing requires. That moment is closer than you think. The moment you stop waiting for permission. There is a permission you have been waiting for that is never going to arrive, not because it does not exist, but because the person you have been waiting to receive it from does not have the authority to grant it. Not your parents, whose approval you may still be seeking in ways that outlasted their direct influence by decades. Not your peers, whose validation feels like evidence but is actually only reflection. Not the circumstances, which will never arrange themselves into the perfect configuration of safety and readiness and guaranteed outcome that the waiting part of you insists must precede the move. The permission you are waiting for can only come from one source, and that source has been available to you the entire time. This is the chapter that does not offer more signs, not because the signs have ended, but because at some point, and that point is now, the accumulation of signs stops being the issue. You have seen enough. You have felt enough. The question has never been one of evidence. It has always been whether you are willing to authorize yourself. Marcus Aurelius returns again and again to a single theme that his modern readers find uncomfortable, precisely because it removes every available excuse. You have everything you need, right now, to begin living in accordance with your nature. Not when the circumstances improve. Not when the fear subsides. The impediment is not external. It has never been external. The impediment is the continued practice of treating your own deepest authority as though it requires ratification from sources outside it. To authorize yourself is not an act of arrogance. The ego waits for external confirmation because it is not secure enough in itself to move without an audience. The soul authorizes itself not because it is indifferent to consequences, but because it has access to a level of intelligence about its own direction that no external authority can match. To wait for permission from the outside is not humility. It is the outsourcing of your life's most important decisions to people and structures that do not have the information necessary to make them well. The Hermetic principle of cause and effect carries a truth that most people spend their lives experiencing from the wrong end. Everything in your outer life is an effect. The causes are interior. The orientation of your attention, the depth of your commitment, the quality of your willingness to act from the center of your own knowing, these are the causes. The circumstances that feel so fixed and given, these are effects. Effects can be changed, but they can only be changed from the level of cause, and the level of cause is always, without exception, interior. This means that the move you have been postponing cannot be made when the outer circumstances finally align. The outer circumstances align when the inner move has already been made. The external shift follows the internal one, always, without exception. This is confirmed by every person who has ever moved from one quality of life to another, and then looked back at the sequence that made it possible. They did not wait for the door to open and then decide to walk. They decided to walk, and then the door opened. What would it mean, specifically and concretely, to authorize yourself today? Not in the abstract. The abstract is where good intentions live indefinitely without disturbing anything. What is the one move, the smallest possible version, that would constitute a real act of self-authorization. The phone call made, the page written, the conversation initiated, the honest answer given to a question you have been deflecting. That step does not require the fear to disappear first. It requires only this: the decision, made in full awareness of the risk, to treat your own knowing as sufficient authority for your own life. You have been given 5 signs. The universe has done its part, with extraordinary consistency and patience, for longer than you have been paying attention. Now it is waiting for you to do yours. What happens after you say yes? Nobody tells you about the silence that follows the yes. The books about transformation tend to end at the moment of decision. The breakthrough, the realization, the scene where the person finally chooses themselves, and the narrative closes on someone walking forward into light. What they do not describe is what actually comes next: the silence, the strange, disorienting absence of the noise that the struggle used to make. The morning after the decision, when the world looks exactly the same as it did before, and the fear is still present, and nothing external has yet confirmed that the yes was the right answer. This is not a warning, it is a preparation, because the people who turn back do not turn back because the path was wrong. They turn back because nobody told them that the path, in its early stages, does not look like a path. It looks like unmarked terrain. It looks like the absence of the familiar structures that used to tell you where you were and how far you had come. The yes is not the arrival. The yes is the departure. And departures, by definition, require leaving something behind: the known, the certain, the identity that was built around not having yet moved. That leaving produces grief, even when it is the right leaving, even when every sign has confirmed it, even when the knowing has been pointing in this direction for years. The grief is real, it deserves acknowledgement, but it is not evidence that the decision was wrong. It is evidence that what you left mattered, and that the version of you willing to leave it anyway has grown into something larger than the version that could not. What follows the yes, in the days and weeks after the internal movement has been made but the external results have not yet appeared, is a test not of whether you made the right choice, but of whether you trust the intelligence that led you to make it. This is the gap that determines everything, the space between the decision and the evidence, the interval between the cause and the visible effect. Most people, when they encounter this gap, interpret its emptiness as confirmation that they were wrong. They retreat to the familiar. They reconstruct the prison they had just begun to leave, with the additional stone of "I tried and it didn't work." But the gap is not empty. It is full of movement that has not yet become visible. Every yes to a genuine direction sets in motion a sequence of causes that will, in their own time and by their own route, produce effects that the moment of decision could not have predicted. The universe does not operate on your preferred timeline. It operates on the timeline that serves the full arc of what is being built, which is almost always longer and stranger and more interesting than the arc you had planned. What is required in the gap is the one practice that no tradition has ever found a shortcut for: patience grounded in trust. Not passive waiting, not the same waiting you were doing before the yes, which was waiting for permission, but active, engaged, present tense trust. The trust of someone who has made their move and is now watching, with genuine curiosity rather than with anxiety, for the response. The trust that knows the response is coming, not because the evidence is already visible, but because the intelligence that sent the signs in the first place has not suddenly stopped being intelligent. You will be tested in this. Something will happen, shortly after the yes, that will look like confirmation that you were wrong. A door will close. A person will disappoint. A circumstance will not cooperate. This is not the universe withdrawing its support. This is the universe testing the depth of the decision. A yes that dissolves at the first resistance was not yet a full yes. It was an intention. The full yes is the one that holds through the first obstacle, and the second, and the third. Not because the obstacles do not matter, but because the direction they are testing matters more. Hold the direction. Let the specific forms of its fulfillment remain flexible. The vision you are moving toward is real. The route it will take to arrive is not yours to dictate. living as someone who has already arrived. There is a version of you that is not waiting for the circumstances to improve, not waiting for the fear to diminish, not waiting for external confirmation that the life being built is the right one. This version is not a future projection. It is available now, as a way of inhabiting the present rather than as a destination to be reached. This distinction is not semantic. It is the difference between two entirely different relationships with your own life. The person who lives toward the arrived self is always in a state of conditional existence. I will be fully present when the relationship is right. I will allow myself to feel joy in the work when it is recognized. I will rest when I have done enough. Every experience is held at a slight remove, processed through the filter of not yet. The life is real, but it is experienced from a position of perpetual arriving rather than perpetual being. And the arrival never comes because the condition that would trigger it keeps moving forward at exactly the same pace as the person pursuing it. The Zen tradition has a phrase for the state this produces: the 10-foot pole. You are on one end. The thing you seek is on the other. No matter how far you travel, the distance remains exactly 10 feet. Because the distance is not geographical, it is produced by the stance, the interior orientation of seeking rather than being. And that stance travels with you everywhere. Meister Eckhart wrote that the now in which God made the first human is the same now in which I am writing this, and the same now in which the last human will live. He was not making a statement about time. He was making a statement about presence, about the eternal availability of the ground of being to anyone willing to stop treating it as a future state and begin inhabiting it as a present reality. The fullness you are seeking is not withheld from you. It is available here in the texture of this actual moment, to the degree that you are willing to be actually in it. This is what it means to live as someone who has already arrived. Not to pretend that the work is finished or that the journey has no further stages. Not to perform contentment over genuine pain. But to bring to this moment, this conversation, this task, this ordinary day with its particular quality of light, the full quality of presence you have been saving for the life you imagined having. To stop rationing your aliveness on the premise that the full version of it should be reserved for circumstances more worthy of it. The Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below, as within, so without, tells us that the outer life is always a correspondence of the inner state. The person who lives as though they have not yet arrived produces consistently a life organized around not yet arriving. The person who inhabits the present with the fullness of someone who has already claimed their life produces, with equal consistency, a life that reflects that claiming back. What does this look like in practice? It looks like doing the work today with the full care it deserves rather than saving that care for when the work is being watched. It looks like being present in the relationships currently in your life rather than mentally inhabiting better relationships you will have when you are more healed. It looks like allowing yourself to feel now the satisfaction of movement in the right direction, not as a substitute for the destination, but as a genuine recognition that the movement itself is not nothing. It looks like speaking from the self you actually are rather than performing the self you think will be more acceptable. It looks like making decisions from your deepest knowing rather than from the surface calculation of what will produce approval. It looks like resting when you need rest without requiring the rest to be earned. The signs that brought you here were never pointing to a destination. They were pointing to a way of being, a quality of presence, a willingness to inhabit your own life fully rather than observing it from the careful distance that fear recommends. You are already there. You have been there the entire time. The practice of noticing. Every tradition that has taken seriously the question of how a human being finds their deepest direction has arrived, by its own particular route, at the same practical conclusion. The capacity to receive guidance is not a fixed trait. It is not something you either have or do not have. It is a practice, a skill developed through repetition, refined through attention, and deepened through the willingness to take seriously what an undeveloped version of the skill would have dismissed as coincidence or mood. The practice has a name, and the name is simpler than the traditions that house it tend to make it sound. The practice is noticing, not analyzing, not interpreting, not immediately constructing a narrative around what has been perceived, simply noticing the quality of your interior state as you move through the different areas of your life, the presence or absence of the particular aliveness that accompanies genuine alignment, the moments when something outside you corresponds, with suspicious precision, to something alive inside you. This sounds passive. It is not. It requires more discipline than most of the active practices that self-development culture recommends, precisely because the culture is organized around doing rather than perceiving. Noticing does not look like progress. It looks like stillness. But the stillness is not empty. It is the condition under which the signal becomes audible, the necessary quieting of the self-generated noise that, in its absence, reveals the transmission that was always present beneath it. The Quaker tradition calls this practice waiting on the Spirit. The gathered community sits in silence until someone is genuinely moved to speak, not moved by the desire to contribute, but moved in the specific way that the body knows as distinct from the mind's volition. The Quakers discovered that this kind of movement is recognizable, that it has a quality that distinguishes it from the ego's desire to be heard, and that the discipline of learning to tell the difference is the central spiritual work of a human life. What they developed in worship is precisely the skill this chapter is describing. The capacity to notice what is actually moving, rather than what the mind thinks should be moving. What does this practice look like in the ordinary texture of a contemporary life? It looks like the habit of pausing, briefly and without ceremony, before the transitions of the day, before shifting from one task to another, before a significant conversation, before a decision, and asking not what do I think about this, but what do I notice about this? Is there the particular contraction that the body produces in the presence of misalignment? Or is there the specific quality of expansion, not excitement, which is a surface state, but the deeper sense of rightness, that accompanies movement in genuine accordance with the deeper direction? It looks like keeping, even irregularly, some form of record of what is noticed. Not for the purpose of analysis, but for the simpler purpose of taking the noticed things seriously enough to write them down. Because the act of writing a thing down says to the interior life, I am listening. And the interior life, like any intelligence that is trying to communicate, responds to being listened to by communicating more clearly. It looks like developing, over time, a relationship with your own body's particular vocabulary of signal, the exact location and quality of the sensation that accompanies the yes that is real versus the yes that is performed, the no that is fear versus the no that is genuine boundary. This vocabulary cannot be learned from a book. It can only be learned from sustained, respectful attention to the body's actual communications over time, in the context of actual decisions and their actual outcomes. And it looks like practicing the most difficult skill of all, distinguishing the voice of the soul from the voice of fear that has learned to speak in the soul's language. Fear is sophisticated. It has learned the patterns of your deepest values and learned to dress its contractions in the language of those values. It will tell you that you are not moving because you are being discerning, that you are not claiming your life because you are being responsible. The noticing practice, developed over time, grounded in the body, tested against the evidence of actual outcomes, is the only reliable instrument for making this distinction, not perfectly, but with increasing accuracy and with the particular confidence that comes from a deepening trust in your own perceptual capacity. The universe has been communicating with you for your entire life. The practice of noticing is not the beginning of that communication. It is the development of your capacity to receive it, to hear not just the loudest signals, but the quieter ones, the daily ones, the ones woven into every moment that is met with genuine attention. Begin where you are. Notice what is here. That is enough. That has always been enough. The universe was never silent. You came to this video carrying something. Perhaps the quiet weight of a life that looked right from the outside but felt misaligned from the inside. Perhaps grief that had not yet resolved itself into meaning, or the exhaustion of someone who has been waiting for a signal without knowing exactly what they were waiting for. Perhaps a vision you had almost given up on, a knowing you had almost finished arguing yourself out of. Whatever brought you here, you arrived with a question underneath all the other questions. Not whether your life could be different. Somewhere beneath the doubt you already knew the answer to that. The deeper question was whether the universe was actually in communication with you. Whether the things that kept happening, the losses and the strangers and the recurring visions and the inexplicable moments of interior certainty, were genuinely meaningful, or whether you were a consciousness alone in an indifferent expanse, pattern-seeking in the noise because the alternative was too bleak to sustain. The answer this video offers is not a doctrine. It does not ask you to adopt a cosmology or a particular metaphysical framework. It asks only that you take seriously what your own experience has been showing you. Not the curated version, the one edited for a culture that rewards skepticism. The actual experience. The moment of knowing that arrived before the explanation did. The stranger who said the exact thing. The loss that cleared exactly what needed to be cleared. The vision that has returned too many times, across too many years, to be dismissed as random psychological noise. Take that experience seriously, with the same rigor and respect you would bring to any other form of evidence about the nature of the world you are living in. The universe communicates through pattern, through resonance, through the felt sense of alignment and misalignment that the body registers before the mind has assembled its explanation, through the removal of what is not serving the deeper direction, through the appearance at moments of greatest need, of the person or the word or the opening that could not have been planned. It was never silent. You were learning to hear. That learning does not end with this video. It deepens with every yes made in the presence of fear, with every moment of genuine presence brought to an ordinary day, with every time you choose to live from the self you actually are rather than from the performance of the self that others find less threatening. The 5 signs described here are not a complete taxonomy of the ways the universe speaks. They are an introduction, an opening of the ear to a frequency that, once heard, begins to reveal itself everywhere, in the texture of the daily life that looked, before, like nothing more than the random accumulation of circumstance. What you are building, as you move forward from this moment, is not just a different life. You are building a different relationship with your own existence. A relationship characterized by attention rather than distraction, by trust rather than the performance of trust, by the willingness to be genuinely moved by what is genuinely moving. This is not a regression to naivety. It is the specific sophistication of the person who has moved through enough to know that the deepest intelligence available to a human life does not live in the defended mind. It lives in the open one. Rilke wrote to the young poet Capus with words that have accompanied more threshold crossings than perhaps any other text in the modern era. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. This video has not given you answers. It has given you a more refined set of questions. Asked not from the anxiety of someone who does not know where they are going, but from the genuine curiosity of someone who has learned to trust the direction they are already moving in. The signs will continue. The universe will not stop speaking because you have learned a few words of its language. It will speak more, or rather, you will hear more, because the ears that have been opened do not close again. Go forward from here with what you have been given. The loss that made space. The knowing that would not go quiet. The stranger who arrived exactly on time. The synchronicity that could not be explained. The vision that has waited, with more patience than you have shown it, for you to finally stop explaining it away and begin moving in its direction. The universe was never silent. You were always being guided. The only question now is what you do with that.